In the 1960s, the Tucson Urban Renewal Project had damaging outcomes for our community, but this urban renewal continues to manifest itself today through luxury development and expansion of the central business district that continues to displace families and makes it possible for developers to contribute to the continuation of the gentrification of Tucson.
It's not about housing, it's about assets. Housing is treated as a commodity rather than a community, where developers get tax incentives to build housing and then ask for another tax incentive to price out the majority of the citizens out of the housing market.
It's not rocket science, you know. What do we think that people need to have a dignified life? It's clear that decent housing, affordable housing, is one of those things.
After the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo that annexed Lower Arizona to the U.S., Anglos began migrating to the predominantly Mexican pueblo of Tucson. They quickly established economic power despite remaining a minority group. By 1888, they were securely established in their economic control, and original Tucsonans began moving south. With the establishment of the U of A in 1885, racial, ethnic, and economic segregation became more pronounced. While Anglos dominated business spheres, Mexican communities began creating their own cultural landscape and safe haven in the barrios that reflected what life was like before the Anglification of Tucson. By 1920, Anglos outnumbered Mexicans in Tucson.
My name is Pedro Gonzalez and I live in Barrio Viejo. I was born in Nogales, Sonora, in Buenos Aires. That's where my mom and my dad are from. 3 boys and 7 girls in the family, and I'm the second oldest. The 3 oldest were born in Nogales. My dad, he immigrated first, and then we came along, and then the 7 of my other brothers and sisters, they were born here. But from the very beginning, we set foot in Barrio Viejo. Barrio Viejo, back then it was beautiful, Barrio Viejo, and you know, there was a lot of mom and pop stores, there was a lot of bakeries, you know, there was a lot of Chinese restaurants that we would go, you know, and there was also a lot of our people, you know, the Mexican people, Mexican American people, and they had their stores.
We walked here, and this is where we did our main purchases in this area. So it's like this commercial activity, I think it was very unique to this area. Now, 100 years later, we have urban planners trying to seek those elusive ingredients that create a so-called healthy city. We used to have those things. We used to have people walking. We used to have building materials that were efficient, energy efficient. We used to have downtown as a destination. And that was 50 years ago. And now we're trying to go back in time and recreate what city leaders purposely tore down.
By the late 1950s, Tucson elites were looking to accommodate the growing suburbanites in the downtown area, and labeled Barrio Libre and Barrio Viejo blighted and slummed. In 1965, the city voted yes on its urban renewal project that would significantly change the city's physical and cultural landscape.
During that time, some city 2 men in ties, 2 white men in ties came and talked to all the families lived on Meyer Street. And since we were real close to 14th Street, they approached us, and so they were telling people, you know, that eventually you're going to have to move. And we said, why? And he says, well, we're knocking all this down, you know. And if you don't want to sell, we're gonna go under the eminent domain. And this is in 1965. By 1966, most of us had already moved from that area, because they made people either sell their place, or if they didn't sell it, and if you rent it, they threatened the landowners. And there was a lot of people that didn't want to sell, and some of them had to sell for nothing. And then the other people that said, I will not sell at all, then they took the property away from them. And so we were all forced to move. We were displaced. And what happened, my mom and dad, you know, they had talked to us and said, well, we don't want to leave the barrio. They were telling we don't want to leave the barrio because, we attended Carrillo School. At the time, we went to Carrillo School and our friends were there, That's the reason why they did urban renewal, because they said it was blighted.
Yeah.
They called us a disease, a cancer. That's what they called us. And that's why the federal government was able to give them monies so they can move us all out, displace us.
In 2008, the city of Tucson, in an effort to revitalize the downtown area and boost economic growth in the central business district after the recession, implemented a number of tax incentives to encourage developers to invest their money in the downtown area and central business district.
Property taxes are going up because these people are building whatever they want. They're building skyscrapers in the barrio. They have made it so expensive because they buy and then they sell, they buy and sell. So they just keep flipping the homes. Most of them not there to live there long time. They're there to make money.
Gentrification is a systematic process of displacing poor people from a community and replacing them with more affluent people, all in the interest of profit. Displacement of working class people takes place throughout all stages of gentrification and by various methods and tactics. The government at all levels is complicit in setting the stage for gentrification and often facilitates it. Developers who take over our barrios and build high-cost housing units for the rich are rarely or never held accountable.
The developers are going to buy up any property that's available, especially lots. Now they're making apartments and some they call it some small business, But that's what they're doing. They're going after old buildings that have been vacant, and that's the whole thing. That's the only way that we can protect our barrios. We need to take over public land. When it comes to private land, it's different. But you got to take over public land and force the city, because we are the taxpayers too. So we have every right to fight for public land because it's ours. We pay for it. But that's the way we're going to do it. Is we need to be at the table and we need to be persistent.
Donde vivió nuestra raza, solo quedan los escombros. Viejo barrio, barrio viejo, que en mi infancia te gocé, y con todos mis amigos.
What really is the Central Business District? According to Wikipedia, a Central Business District, or a CBD, is the commercial and business center of a city. It contains commercial space and offices. Tucson uses its Central Business District to give developers tax break incentives. These incentives are called GPLETs. What is a GPLET? GPLET stands for Government Property Lease Excise Tax. It is a complicated name with a simple goal: give private developers the same benefits that governments have to avoid paying property taxes. Now, what have these GPLETs done? Besides gentrified communities, they have given away much needed city tax dollars. They make the rich richer and create urban removal. The city of Tucson's current program results show us that there was 8 converted parking lots, 5 activated vacant buildings, 5 historic buildings that were rehabilitated or preserved. There was 1 vacant lot that was developed, and there was 0 replaced single-family homes. But what they didn't tell you is that even though it did not replace single-family homes, it did displace families. One of the biggest concerns that our coalition has is that there is such a lack of affordable housing here in Tucson. The City of Tucson's Planning and Development Services have claimed that over 40 projects have been approved and facilitated, over 1,500 units including affordable housing and senior housing. And although 1,500 housing units were built, what we want to know is how many did we lose? And we have asked for this information, but the city has never provided it to us. The city highlights the rendezvous as the kind of project they want to see downtown. But leading back to affordable housing, how many of you can afford $4,000 in rent a month? Displacement. Rising property values in the central business district have affected our barrios and our neighborhoods. Our residents have difficulty keeping up with rising rents and property tax. Our long-time residents and historic families whose homes have been in their families for generations are being displaced. This is gentrification. Many of the developments funded by this program have been luxury rentals and condos which are not realistically affordable for most Tucsonans. Could this have been avoided? Well, if the city had followed the law, it is quite possible that we might have been able to avoid this new version of urban renewal. So what do we mean by not following the law? Well, there's the redevelopment area. The state required the city to create a redevelopment area plan. The plan should have included input from affected residents, opportunities for technical assistance and job counseling, development of affordable housing, support for local businesses, low-interest loans for rehabilitation of owner-occupied residences. But instead, the city ignored the law and never created a redevelopment area plan. Check out these two recently won court cases. Thank you everybody for being here. My name is Roxy Valenzuela. I was raised in South Park neighborhood. I live and work at Casa Maria Catholic Workers Community, and I'm a member of the Barrio Neighborhood Coalition. So why are we here? We're here because our barrios and our neighborhoods are being gentrified. And we are concerned that if the city continues to doing business as usual in regards to downtown development, we will see urban renewal all over again. For a few years now, our coalition has tried to raise the issue of gentrification, but we have adamantly and absolutely not been listened to. And the sad part is that it's mostly the wealthy developers who have gotten these incentives, changing the makeup of downtown and just making it inaccessible for people who have little to no money. And the city and the Office of Economic Development refuse to have any real dialogue with the neighbors and the advocates. But why do they do that? Maybe it's because it's the other guys that are funding their campaigns. But anyways, when it comes down to the Central Business District, our groups have done a very good job of bringing awareness to many people in the city. We've been raising this issue up. And the city, knowing this, they did about, I think, 7 public meetings. But let me tell you, from the people that we know who attended this, it was all fake public community engagement, that they called it. But I think that was the whole point of this. They weren't designed to get real input. They were designed to check off a box and keep people muzzled. What do we do to beat City Hall? Do we give up? Do we whimper? Do we cry? Nah, that's not how we roll. We are not going to accept being insulted, and that's why we're here today. We're here to have our own not fake public input meeting, and we're asking you for ideas, for solutions. I don't know, it could be maybe like we need new city council members. I don't know, but we're excited to hear what you have to say. Joe Audino has lived in the greater Tucson area for over 35 years. He's a member of the Barrio Neighborhood Coalition and co-founder and board member of the historic 4th Avenue Coalition. Joe enjoys involvement with local government and reading about housing, economics, and public policy. Angie Quiroz is a community organizer and member of a multi-generational family, born, raised, and living in the barrio. Raul Ramirez is a lifelong Tucsonan and West Side resident. He comes from a family of activists of Tucson politics for generations. He is a member of the Barrio Neighborhood Coalition and board member of Menlo Park Neighborhood Association. He is also a former board member of Mission Garden and former president of Los Descendientes. Dennis Alvarez was born and raised in Barrio Membrillo, in a home built by his father. He and his sister, who still live in the family home, have first-hand experience of both urban renewal and the initial construction of I-10. Dennis is an Army veteran who graduated from the U of A and had a long career as a civil engineer for ADOT. Dennis was working for ADOT when the recent expansion of I-10 affected the barrio neighborhoods again. And finally, Bill Reisner. He is a local attorney who has had a long history of representing poor people and has put a big shining spotlight on local corruption for many years. So, Bill, what has your experience been with Applied Economics, the company that the city hires to write the economic reports?
Well, first, I think in my experience, the city does not hire them. They're hired by the person who's seeking the benefits. But in any event, in a case I handled concerning the city trying to give away to a for-profit company, the El Rio golf course and park area, the city staff worked with the applied economics company to come up with fake numbers. The person, I got the emails from the city. The applied economics wrote the city and said, here's the numbers. We have done research, and very few of the students that are proposed attend Grand Canyon University would live in dorms. And the city staff person said, well, talk to the lawyer who runs that company, their general counsel, and he'll tell you the facts you need to use. And so she had told the city that her research was that over 80% of the students would just, drive to school and wouldn't live there. The general counsel said, no, we're going to have 80% of our students will live on dorms at the proposed campus area. And of course, this was the same time that the same person was telling the Wall Street investors that they weren't going to have any dorms at all. But in any event, he gave that information to Applied Economics, who then in an email to the city said, here are the new numbers, and these really change the numbers. And the city says, great, that's what we want. So it was a situation where the staff was working with Applied Economics to give them numbers that the city staff knew was wrong. I ran into the similar situation with Rio Nuevo Group, because again, with Rio Nuevo, the person or the company that's seeking benefits hires this company to run the economic analysis. I made a public record request for what was the software they were using, because they plug in numbers that gives an answer. I wanted to know what's the mathematics, how does this answer get based on the inputs? And it turns out that the staff did not have anyone to critically analyze what's going on. So this company can not only make up the numbers, but make up everything. And there's no really critical analysis. But it's a joint dance. It's the agency that wants to give benefits to the companies, and it's the companies that hire Applied Economics and pays them to give them the answer that as good an answer as they can get.
Could you explain what the purpose of the gift clause is, and what have you found during the legal battles with the city, especially as it relates to accountability?
Well, the purpose of the gift clause is so that the government doesn't lend money, give special benefits to private companies or persons. And it's a pretty strong clause in our Constitution. But we have a city attorney that is kind of a specialist, he claims, in the gift cause. And there's a variety of ways that benefits can be given that they think does not violate the gift clause. And the G-plets include some of those things. Um, one of the interesting things for me, I think, that uh, explain what goes on at City Hall is some litigation I had involving the attempted sale of El Rio. And this was highly unusual. The El Rio golf course park area is something like 114 acres. The city of Tucson has never sold any part of what the city owns that was being used to someone, but they were going to sell it to this company. And the city has rules on appraising property. You're supposed to appraise it at a full market value. They have someone on behalf of the city that reviews the appraisal to see if it's correct, so forth. In this situation, we had the city manager sent a letter to this private company, Grand Canyon, and pointed out that this property was unique. It was phenomenal. It had mature vegetation. It was near the hospital, the university downtown, and so forth. But they wanted to sell it to the private company. And so they needed to get an appraisal. So they called the appraiser and said, would you give us an idea of what this property is worth, as if it was dirt that had no trees, as if it didn't have these other benefits. And hey, why don't you use as a comparable another deal where an old what had been a drive-in theater about 6 or 7 miles away was appraised. So we had a piece of property worth about $75 million, in my view. It was to be kept in the name of the city so that there wouldn't be taxes on it because it would be municipal owned. But these guys could rent this thing for 50 years. And the city estimated they would save like 75 million in taxes over that period of time. So basically, they were going to give relatively free to a private company what would be worth $150 million at a minimum, I think, to the city. And the manager, of course, knew about what some of the problems were. He knew that there weren't enough park space on the west side. So his letter said, of course, we need to talk because there's not enough park space on the west side. So there may be, public might not like this. So, but anyway, he offered to sell it with incredible sweet deals. That's unbelievable. And the city council and mayor claimed that they had never approved it being sold in the first place. So anytime you want to look at these deals, the way to view it is that it's almost as if it's a racketeering organization where they make all the changes that are needed to get something by and to make it look like a proper deal. And when the city council finds out about all of this stuff, what the people did, everyone involved got a raise and was lauded on what a terrific job they did by lying to the court and to the public.
Raul, you've lived in Tucson for a very long time. Would you say your neighbors have benefited from these incentives and this growth?
I think it depends on the neighborhood, but in general, I would say no, because the incentives that include, the central business district, which is kind of the geographic area, along with a G-plex, which is kind of the general property lease back, that provides 8 years abatement within that area. They don't benefit directly from it. I mean, you see the changes downtown. And if you think of the central business district as being primarily downtown, and if you have the analogy of a lake and you drop a big rock in the lake, then you see the concentric circles gravitating, not gravitating, but going towards the shore. And that's kind of how I imagine it and visualize it affecting the barrios. Because even though the high-end development is not happening in the barrios, it is affecting them. And the way it affects them is through property taxes. And in our neighborhoods, we have many people that are retired and that live on fixed incomes, and they may have property. And then you have other folks that rent. And the way it affects both of these categories, those that are property owners and renting, is that over time their taxes will increase. And so I've known of folks in my area, in my neighborhood, that that have had issues and actually even lost their properties. So let me explain. One of the two families that I'm thinking about were retired husband and wife. And in one case, and there were in one case, they were blue collar, in the other case, they were more working professionals. But the the working family that are blue collar, first the wife died, and so the man took out a reverse mortgage. And then when he died, the family wanted to take ownership of the house, but the bank said, well, you have to clear up this debt. And so they had to pay the amount that was borrowed, including the interest, but also they tacked on the current appraisal of the property. So as I mentioned, the way neighborhoods are affected through gentrification is tax increases. So the properties have increased in value. So the family that wanted to purchase the house back and thereby trying to create equity for themselves, and we call it intergenerational equity, wealth, were not able to do that. In another case, there was a renter that was initially and living in an area that was being highly impacted, by, it's very close to a downtown area. It's the Menlo Park area. And that person was renting. And the landlord said, well, my taxes are going up and property values are going up, so I'm going to increase your rent. Well, in doing so, it really locked him out of continuing to rent that property. The good news for that individual was that he was able to find another rental within the same community that he could afford. But those two cases really point out to how what we're seeing in the downtown area, in the central business district, which is really downtown, is affecting neighborhoods. On the other end of the spectrum, you have young professionals, and I have knowledge of two young professionals, both minority. One was a Latino, one was African American, and both of them were, by the way, working for the city of Tucson, and they're making fairly okay salaries, I would think, And they wanted to buy a property close to the downtown area, close to City Hall, so they could commute easily to work. And in both cases, they were looking around the Menlo Park area. And again, they couldn't find anything they could afford. And so let me dig a little further into this issue. In the Menlo Park area, you have one of the areas that's inclusive of Menlo Park is called Barrios Sin Nombre. And it's a very small community. It's an old community. It's been primarily working class, Mexicano. And within the last, I say 5 to 7 years, there's been at least 10 properties that have exchanged hands. And many of those properties have been rehabbed and by flippers and then sold again. And if you, for example, if you go down, let's say you're going down Grande, say going south on Grande, and you're passing by the area, you're going to notice that there's two-story buildings next to each other. And those have been rather recent within the last couple of years. And then in the same neighborhood, you're finding, I know of at least 3 homes that have been built, and one of them was rehabilitated, flipped in a sense. And they're selling for $450,000 and over. And so it's really locking people out of the market that are interested in buying unless you're pretty well off. So that's the story. That's kind of what we're seeing in the immediate areas. And it's not only the Menlo Park, but it's also inclusive of the other traditional barrios.
We're going to go on with Angie. Angie, we started this program by reviewing the urban renewal that occurred in the 1960s. There are those who refer to this as urban removal. Would you agree that that assessment is correct? And tell us what you have witnessed.
I absolutely agree that the barrios have removed and displaced several of our families. And let me tell you why. When they decided to build the I-10 freeway, they placed it in the barrios. And that affected the surrounding community there. Barrio Membrillo, for example, there's only a sliver left because of the displacement of our families. And it broke up the community. And then you had the disastrous urban renewal of the 1960s, where over 300 familias were displaced, and it broke up our community. My family was impacted by urban renewal. I lived through it. And then you had county chambers in Barrio Santa Rosa. 192 familias displaced. That is urban removal, the displacement of our families. So anytime the government comes in with a redevelopment project, it is displacing our familias from the barrios. They want our land, they want our homes, and they're finding ways to do it. Any redevelopment is urban renewal.
So a common concern we hear from residents is that the city does not include its citizens in the planning process. Dennis, I understand that your barrio was impacted both by urban renewal and again by the original construction of the I-10. You're a retired engineer for ADOT, correct? And can you just elaborate between how Tucson treated the residents of the barrios during urban renewal and how ADOT treated the residents when the I-10 was widened?
I'll just touch back with what Angie said, is that I think about 1948, the city passed bonding for construction of the first part of I-10, which was a divided roadway that would allow future expansion in between the two roadways that were there now. At that time, Angie mentioned they split Barrio Membrillo, where I was born and raised. And I had relatives that lived in that area that was fully impacted. Basically, the city told them, you're going to sell out and move out, period. Later on, when they began the urban renewal process, again, to my recollection and growing up in the neighborhood and talking to my parents, people were never contacted. They were just told they would have their homes bought out by the city at what they call fair market value. And that meant that they hired, again, their own assessor. And there were many families that grew up in Membrillo and in El Hoyo that basically were told, this is what your house is worth, and this is what we're going to pay, and we're going to knock them down. There was no planning ahead of time to involve the neighborhood on what was going to happen. No plans were presented, no public meetings. They were just told they had to move. There, among these were a lot of elderly people, and throughout Membrillo, throughout El Hoyo, many elderly people, including my step-great-grandmother. Now, what happened was that the price that were given, no one could afford to buy something livable for the amount that was given. So the elderly people, they ended up living with their sons and daughters, who many lived in a barrio. They were also displaced. So it had a chain reaction to the point where, one of the homes that was still remaining there was where I lived, and it was far enough from Clark Street and freeway that were saved. So there is a difference of what today occurs. It's a whole new operation based on federal requirements that had they happened back then. It would have taken a lot longer to build a freeway and follow up with I-10. Now, there's more questions. People want to ask questions about the new process with ADOT, but I think that may come later.
Perfect. Thank you so much for sharing that with us, Dennis, and for your services. I know you're a veteran and a U of A graduate, so thank you so much for everything you do. And I just want to thank all the panelists. I know you guys all have a busy life. I know, Dennis, you just paused because you had a funeral to do this panel, and everybody has something to do. So thank you for being here and joining us in this warm Saturday afternoon. So we're going to go ahead and go into the questions. We have several questions here. Let me see here. And a lot of them are directed to specific panelists, and some are pretty general. So I'm just going to go ahead and start with the first one, and it's for Joe. Joe, you mentioned something in the slide presentation about redevelopment plan. Can you explain this?
Yeah, sure, Roxy. This is, I got to give kudos to one of our Barrio Neighborhood Coalition people, Colette Altan, for doing so much of the work on this. But basically, when you engage with something like a central business district and define that, you're doing the redevelopment, and you need a redevelopment area and a redevelopment plan. Now, they've defined an area, but one of our concerns is that they didn't really ever put forth a redevelopment plan about what was going to go on there. And Bill can probably quote the ARS better than I do. This is 13-1479. And it says a municipality shall not acquire real property for a redevelopment project unless the local governing body has approved a redevelopment plan as prescribed in subsection yada yada. And the GPLETs are, the way that works is that the city's acquiring that real property and then leasing it back to the developer. So I'm not sure the GPLETs are even lawful without the redevelopment plan. That would require, I think it says a 2/3 vote of something like a city council. So Tucson would have had to approve that. We don't see that, and I don't know what the remedy is if somebody even sues the city and says that that's a problem. You know, does that? I doubt that would invalidate the G-plats that have come before, but that would at least make them put forth some kind of a plan for what's happening. And so far, all we've heard is, you know, we've mentioned the word slum and blight a couple of times. What we keep hearing is that, well, this is the Central Business District is a program that's designed to cure slum and blight. And the city put forth a whole presentation and a paper about why the Central Business District is like consumed predominantly by slum and blight. And I think for Tucsonans who know the area around downtown, they know that doesn't seem true. And to me, it's also that the city's trying to have things both ways. You know, if you're going to say that we've been doing this for 8 years and they always want to say the CBD and the G-Flood programs have been hugely successful. Look at all of the ones we've done, and look at all the development down Congress Street and Broadway and on all these areas and how great this all is. Well, okay, if that's true, then either the Central Business District has been great and it's worked and it's redeveloped all this stuff and it's not slum and blight anymore, so why are we renewing it? Or you have to admit that this hasn't worked the way we want it to, and then the question is, why are we renewing it? So, you know, if they had come back and said, this works great, we're going to take downtown out of the Central Business District now and move on to just some different areas that haven't seen the development, like they'd be presenting a different case, but that's not what we're doing. I think that's really disappointing. You can't have it both ways. Either this is terrific and it's redeveloped everything and slum and blight is cured and we don't need downtown in the CBD anymore, or it's not working the way we want it to. And it's not serving the needs of the community, which right now is largely about affordability. And we shouldn't be renewing it for that reason. So those are kind of my concerns around that and how that relates to a redevelopment plan, really.
Thank you for that. The next one, it's pretty general, but I would address it to Raul or Angie. Now that these incentives have been handed out for almost 10 years, what concerns, if any, are you hearing from the residents of the barrios?
Angie, do you want to go first? Or do you want me to go?
Angie, if you're speaking, you're muted.
Yeah, I guess I can go since Angie's muted. So, you know, one of the concerns, and Joe alluded to it, is that this whole issue of blighted. So they use a definition of blighted for the Central Business District. And what they did is they included neighborhoods, community neighborhoods that are, you know, lower income or working class. And through the statistics, because they included those, then they were able to make a case for blighted. And of course, we don't agree that our neighborhoods or barrios are blighted, but they use that definition. And it would have been okay, I guess, if they actually would have helped low-income areas, right? I mean, who wouldn't want better housing, affordable housing? But that's not what they did. They actually focused on the downtown area. And one could make an argument, well, it's old and tired, which is true, you know, downtown. I mean, I grew up here in Tucson, but it didn't make it blighted. So, you know, I think they play around with language, you know, and then they turn it against us, and it only helped the developers. There's another one that, you know, people haven't mentioned yet, and that's the TIF, and that's the one that Rio Nuevo, the tax incentive district, the Rio Nuevo was about, and that's downtown also. And initially it had to do with building cultural centers in the downtown area. And, you know, a lot of it was going to go in the Menlo Park area. And there's an old site, historical site, San Agustin, Convento and Mission. And so a lot of stuff was going to happen there. And then, the recession hit, and then everything changed. And then the new Rio Nuevo board came in and basically said, no, we're not about the cultural centers anymore. We're about development. And I remember I talked to Fletcher one time, and Fletcher McClusker is the chair of that committee. And I asked him about, well, why don't we start building low-income, housing? And he said, no, we're not about that. We're not about doing that. So they could have done it. They have, because they've been able to, now that the economy has gotten better, they've been able to, I guess, fill their coffers, even though, again, now because of COVID, things slowed down in the downtown area. They primarily depend on sales tax revenues. That's basically how they, and that money is set aside for the district, which is Rio Nuevo, and that's the money they use to spur development. And they call it a private public partnership, but the people that are the public isn't really, again, gaining anything, because it's these high rises, it's large businesses that come in, and one of them is like Caterpillar. So, and that was a top-down decision too for the neighborhoods. They'd had no input into that decision. So there's a lot of frustration. There's a lot of anger. Going back to your question, how do people feel? But in fairness, I also want to add that some folks see it as a positive. They see the new urbanism. They call it the new urbanism, and they see downtown development, and they say, oh, that's great. And in the meantime, their taxes have gone up. But most of the people that think it's a good thing, they're in a higher economic bracket also. So to them, it is a good thing, But the people that are in the barrios, low income, working class, it's not.
Thank you, Raul. Angie, what have you heard the residents of the barrio say? What concerns do they have?
Well, let me start off with a story. When I was organizing in Barrio Santa Rosa, trying to save county chambers, I heard that a newcomer had moved into the barrio and they had called the police on their neighbors. It was about midnight, and in reality, what it was that the neighbor was celebrating a vigil of the Virgen de Guadalupe. And in the vigils, you have hymns, and you have prayer, and you have a dinner. And what I'm seeing is a clash of standards. You have a newcomer coming in that doesn't understand our way of life. And I remember an elderly lady telling me that urban renewal gentrification was death to our way of life. And instead of coming in and understanding the culture, understanding our way of life, it's viewed as something that is not respected, okay? It's not respected as far as coming into a new neighborhood, a new barrio. And I want to say one more thing about how I've heard that, they basically saved downtown. It's improved, it's way better than what it used to be. But I want to go back to before urban renewal, because it was the familias from the barrios that were supporting the downtown businesses. When you removed all that buying, purchasing power, when you removed barrios, downtown declined, okay, because the families were no longer there. And it was where you had retail that sold to every level, every income level. You had the affluent, you had retail for low income and middle class. And we don't have that anymore. It caters to the affluent.
Thank you, Angie. So we have over 25 questions. I'm just gonna pick a couple of more. This one is for Dennis. With your experience with ADOT, what would you like to see the city do to ensure residents are included in the planning process?
Well, I think it should be is before coming up with different projects is have not just public meetings, but have somebody go into the neighborhoods for those people that can explain to them what lies ahead. That's number one. One of the successes we had with rebuilding Valencia Road, rebuilding I-10, I-19 interchange, and rebuilding I-10 was the fact that we brought in people in the beginning and referred to them as stakeholders. They had input. They were invited to public meetings. They were invited to participate. And later on, when ADOT actually had to begin the process of acquiring properties, we actually sent people, a public information group, to meet with the residents, speak to them about what impact the project would have on their property, and if the property was designated as a property to be purchased, they would sit down and explain what the process will be, including what today they call relocation expenses, where if a person's property is not valued, the fair market value is less than what an equal to property, then there's additional expenses that by law the federal government does pay, and that even for renters, they're also subsidized with the ability to move out, rental, relocation expenses. And beforehand, as I mentioned earlier, people weren't notified of what programs there were. And during the development process, again, we had meetings. There were committee people that were asked the residents to participate during the design process, not after everything was decided, because many times we made changes. Some of the changes that occurred during the reconstruction of I-10 were the barrier sound walls. Some of them were moved. Some neighborhoods did not want them. We listened to them. We said, okay, you don't want it, fine, but you understand the process. Other neighborhoods say, why were we excluded? And we listened to them and we added barrier walls. And then we went to the media, and we used the media to help us. One of our best friends in the media was Alan Gates. And people started believing what ADOT was promising. The meetings, stakeholder meetings, public outreach. I don't know how many times I met with neighborhoods. Not all the neighborhood people were friendly towards me, but I responded in a professional manner, explained to them again, what was going to happen. And when I would leave the meetings, I think I left with more friends than enemies.
Thank you so much. That's really helpful. Bill, so this one's for you. If we're understanding you correctly, we're going to continue to see sweetheart deals made by our politicians. What do you think the residents of Tucson need to do to change the system?
Well, there's a whole bunch of things. If you would look at the way this money's handled out when someone comes to the developer, the developer who's asking for the millions pays for the economic study. I saw one that the Rio Nuevo did. I asked for a copy of it for what was called the Wigorama building. And I could see that it was nonsense. It's just ridiculous what the person had, the economist had concluded. So I asked Rio Nuevo, who on your staff reviews these? None. They have no staff that looks at it. And then I said, well, the economist uses a computer that has software, plugs in numbers and gets an answer. I'd like to know what that software says they're plugging in. Oh no, that's a state secret. When the person comes in from the string pullers there asking for the millions, they hire a lawyer or a consultant, but nobody knows what they get. What's their piece of the action, the people that are coming in and asking for this stuff. So the data itself is rigged. For instance, I talked about El Rio. This was an amazing thing where everybody knows what a great park it was. And they asked the appraiser that worked for the city, give us an answer, assuming it's bare dirt with nothing on it. That was what they requested. And of course, they get a low answer. So you have to look at these deals and figure out if you're really trying to stop it, what the city needs to do and can do to make it a more honest process.
Thank you. There is, where'd it go? Do any of these ideas for different tactics that the people can use for gentrification, what do we do if the city of Tucson is not listening to us? I think that's just in general, if anybody wants to pick that up.
Yeah, I can. We had the question in the chat Q&A kind of there, and Scott Egan asked about it. What can we do to hold government and candidates accountable for lack of transparency? And Trish had a good answer. Let's re-engage with our government officials, the ones we've already elected. And as we're talking about a campaign going on, right now, we've got city council seats open, Ward 3, Ward 5's up this year, and Ward 6. So hold these candidates, hold their feet to the fire. Let's ask them tough questions, all of them. Full disclosure, I'm working for one of the ones in Ward 6, and I live in Ward 5. And I know Richard Fimbers is running unopposed in Ward 5, but I think he should be asked the questions about what are we doing to preserve affordability. Our housing market has transformed into this thing where we're not just, if you're looking to buy a house, just some shelter, you're not just competing against other people who want to have a house in Tucson. You're competing to buy that with real estate investment trusts. You're competing against private equity giants. You're competing against investors big and small. You're competing against house flippers. And the prices are skyrocketing. Nobody can afford to buy a house. Raul, mentioned that. And with the values going up, the rents are going up. Do we have any kind of a plan for that? Are we talking about, increasing public housing? Are we talking about social housing? Are we talking about voucher expansion so that we don't have years-long waiting lists for people trying to get some kind of housing that's affordable? So I think one of the things that Trish and Scott alluded to, and I think one of the things I hope we all agree with, is that when we're talking about the political structure, and Bill said we're talking about the political structure in Tucson, we have to continue to demand accountability. And if we're not seeing it from the people who are in office, elect better people. Let's do it.
Nice. Raul, could you elaborate on how incentives cause gentrification and displacement?
Well, if the incentives were, let me piggyback a little bit about what Joe was saying too, in terms of, and other people have talked a little bit about the study. Bill also talked about a study that's done in terms of to qualify for a GPLET, and it's through the Applied Economics. Is a firm out of Phoenix, and that costs like $5,000. Okay, so going back to your question now, in terms of one of the things they could do is make it easier for legacy small businesses. In other words, mom and pop businesses that have been serving our communities for a long time, to be able to, if you're going to have that incentive, let's make it fair. Let's have a level playing field where they could also be able to apply for some of these incentives, but they don't, because right at the top you have to have at least $5,000. You have $5,000 to make that study. And then I also think those studies are suspect, as Bill was saying. And then the other part of the studies is they're never evaluated. They never go back and say, well, did you really do what you said you're going to do in the study? So that's one thing. The other thing is that, I've been thinking about this for a while too, is that the city of Tucson has properties that they owned, that are vacant, that are available. And instead of selling them to developers, I think those properties should be set aside for low-income housing. And it could be a mix. It could be a mix of people buying their own homes, because that's how minority communities build wealth, through they call it intergenerational wealth. And right now the loans are pretty low percentage in terms of how you pay on the loans, but it's hard to qualify. So let the city start helping develop housing. And the other way they could also help is also through building apartments. But I would think that whichever way you go with in terms of those properties that are owned by the city, whether it be single homes or apartments, that the adjacent communities have to have input, and that talks to what Dennis was talking about, is kind of engagement. There has to be a real process of engagement, where the folks in those particular neighborhoods, where the city has properties that are available or could be available, are also engaged into a discussion of what would you like to see in your backyard, or who would you like to see as the type of housing that's going to be there. So those are things that could be done, and the city does have more leeway instead of private properties, because then you get into private properties, and once they're in private hands, a developer, as long as they're following the codes, city codes, or they can also go through revision of some of those codes, get permission. But and when they do that, there is a public process, but it's really weighted towards the decision making is weighted towards the developers.
Thank you. Thanks, Raul. This was a general question. I would refer to Bill. How does the city define a slum or blight?
Yeah, I don't know. I don't.
As broadly as possible.
The only thing that we know is that the definition is fluid enough that they can fake it. I mean, that's what that case I talked about that was 40 years ago. There was when the city declared Snob Hollow to be blighted, which was right next to City Hall. Used to be the fine home area of Tucson. It's still a great area. And the mayor said, Snob Hollow, blighted? That's ridiculous. Then they voted for it and said it was blighted. So.
Thanks. So the final question I have is to Joe. What do you think the city should do about the central business district? Should it stay or should it go? Or should we be looking at making major changes to it?
I mean, my desire for this from the beginning was that we get rid of it. And the city's case for this is that we can't take a tool out of the toolbox to spur development, because then we won't get any development. And like if you're going to use the analogy of a tool in a toolbox, I want to ask what we've been building with that tool. And so far, it's been unaffordable housing. You walk by, what is it, 1 East and 1 West Broadway, and it says an exclusive development. Exclusive. Who are we excluding? You go to the Rendezvous, and we're talking about places with $1,800 rents to start with, up to $4,000 a month for rent for your apartment downtown. And these are the projects that we keep incentivizing. We've given GPLETs to a couple of hotels downtown, AC Marriott, the Hyatt Regency. We've seen them go to the Union on 6th, and these are the big ones. There are some GPLETs that are small ones, where somebody's getting $500,000 to do a renovation. But these are the $4 or $5 million ones I'm talking about. The Union on 6th is owned by Greystar. It's a private equity giant. They're huge. They own hundreds of thousands of units or manage them. Opus is a Minnesota developer that was developing the 4th Avenue and 9th Street parcel. The Cadence was one of the early GPLETs, and that's right downtown, right next to Rialto. That was student housing, and now they're renovating that to do some different upscale apartments. So if the tool is building only unaffordable housing and isn't working to the community needs, one of my points was we should take that tool out of the toolbox. I don't trust the city to keep doing these incentive deals when they haven't proven that they're going to do it responsibly, and they're not going to do it by listening to the community. So I don't think there's much hope that they're going to, scrap this at any point in the near future. I think they're going to go forward with, they renewed the Central Business District. I think they're going to try to expand it a little bit. I think I would have liked to see them take areas out of it that don't need these kind of projects anymore, and really focus on places that could use the right kind of investment. And to me, if you're going to give an incentive, I think you probably should be either including housing that's affordable, make a percentage of it. If you want to do a mixed income development, go for it. Have some of it be affordable housing, have some of it be workforce housing, have some of it would be market rate housing. Let's incentivize that. Can we do that? Well, we hear from every developer that it won't pencil out. So that's out the window. But I feel like you should either have to do that, or you should have a project that your community wants. That we're seeing a problem with that, like Rincon Heights right now, 6th Street and Campbell Avenue, right? Developer wants to rezone right there. What is, a place where you can have a 30-foot maximum, and really there's nothing. They got a parking garage that's a few stories high in that neighborhood. Yeah, just outside of it, at one of the corners, there's a student housing that's like 6 stories. The guy who owns it wants to come in and say that we're going to build 14 stories here. We can put in a big bar. We want, I think, 26 different kinds of land uses. We just want it to be as broad as possible. We want to build as high as we want. And we don't care about the neighborhood context. We don't care about the neighborhood input. The meetings that the neighborhood has had, they felt ignored. And if somebody wants to do a project like that, whether we're talking about rezoning so that somebody can build a development, or whether we're talking about the development itself, I'd love to see a mandate that you need a community benefits agreement. You need to talk to the actual neighborhoods around there and come to some kind of a consensus that you're building something that's not just going to be good for you, that's not just going to make you money, but that is something that's actually good for the community, something that's good for the city, something that includes what we need. So, I mean, if I could put restraints on this program, I don't think it's going to be shrunken or disregarded at any point. So if I could put guardrails on it or restraints, my thing would probably be don't give any kind of these incentives unless we're including affordable housing. Somebody maybe could donate to our city's affordable housing trust. You get a $5 million GPLET. All right, kick us $400,000 a year to the affordable housing trust for the next 8 years, and we'll start talking about your incentive. Or something the community really, really needs and can come together on, and have a project with a CBA, a community benefits agreement. Those would be my thoughts about how to move forward if we still have the CBD and GBOT programs.
Great answer. Right on. So we have really good questions regarding the Rio Nuevo, the U of A, and people have shared really great stats, and we'll get all of that out to you guys. I want to thank you all who watched and submitted the questions. We'll try to post the answers on our website as soon as possible. But do any of the panelists have any additional comments they would like to share before we wrap this up?
I just want to say, first of all, I want to thank you, Roxy, but also all the people that were sponsors, including Casa Maria and the labor, the union folks. And I just want to say that I think the work that, and I want to toot our horn a little bit too. The Barrio Neighborhood Coalition has done a lot of good work and has advocated and will continue to advocate. So we're not going to go away. We're going to still be here and trying to educate the community and hopefully bring about changes. So thank you.
Thank you for that, Raul. Now, you may be asking yourself, what can I do about this? How can I possibly make a difference? You might feel that you and your neighbors are the only ones facing a crisis, but you're not. Across this city, there are many neighborhoods fighting different battles. And if we want to make a difference, we must stand and support each other. Only when we stand together can we truly make a difference. So are you angry? I hope you're angry. Now, what can you do? First of all, join the Barrio Neighborhood Coalition and fight gentrification in your barrio. You can visit us at www.bnctucson.org and sign up for our newsletter. If you are tired of being treated like a second-class citizen, tired of struggling to afford housing, and tired of always being excluded from the decision-making processes, let your voices be heard. Email your elected representatives.